So thank you again for the wonderful introduction. And yes, one of my roles here at MCW is an assistant dean in faculty affairs. And as part of faculty affairs, part of our job is ultimately to figure out how to make MCW one of the best places to be a faculty member. And we're actually very, very passionate about that in our office. And so to do that, we really take a decided interest in career development, leadership development, as well as wellness, because we see those three things integrated very closely together. But wellness in general has really become a hot topic lately. You can't escape any academic medicine literature without reading about physician burnout, the contrary to that being wellness, and where we're at in academic medicine. So today what we're going to do is spend some time talking about that, talking about some ideas behind wellness, balance, grit. We're going to talk about Seligman's PERMA model. I know that sounds crazy, but we're going to go through all the pieces of that and actually help you understand what that means from an individual basis and how we can begin to conceptualize wellness for ourselves. I'm also a wanderer when I talk usually, so if at some point you guys can't hear me, just holler, because it means I've walked away too far, all right? So let's start out by talking about what the problem is. Hopefully you've all started looking at some of this literature, but ultimately when we look at the burnout literature, we find that Maslach, Christine Maslach, is one of the original pioneers of talking about what this actually means. So when we conceptualize burnout, and physicians in particular, we find three different criteria that really speak to the definition, and we're going to talk about these several times today. Those three primary criteria that we measure when we look at burnout in physicians include emotional exhaustion, depersonalization, and low personal accomplishment. And we'll get into more about what that means. But if we look at her work, we find that up to 50% of the individuals in her studies show signs of burnout within their positions. When we really start digging into a lot of the meta-analyses that are out there now, a lot of the literature, this is a topic that's been looked at for the last several decades. It's not actually brand new. It's just really come into our attention far more recently as it's become more of a critical kind of issue related to our own wellness and how physicians are remaining in the field or not remaining in the field. So if we look at studies that look at over 100,000 physicians across the world, not just in the US, one of the most interesting things we find is that the burnout ranges are all over the map. So right away we see from a research perspective, this is a very difficult topic to conceptualize. If we really dig into these studies, we find over 140 unique different ways of defining burnout. So ultimately what we're looking at is the genesis of an issue that we have as of yet to really cohesively define. That means that everybody is measuring it slightly differently. That means we don't all really understand what it is we're talking about, and that makes it very difficult, obviously, as you know, to figure out exactly what to do about it, because if we can't study it, we're not sure what we're all looking at. What we do know, and one of the articles that was forwarded to you ahead of time, is that the increased levels of burnout in physicians correlate with decreased patient safety and issues related to healthcare that are germane to all of us. So if we really look at how it impacts our daily performance as clinicians and physicians, we see increased safety issues, we see increased issues of poor professionalism, and most of all, and interestingly, we see decreased patient satisfaction. This is something that we've actually seen personally here with our faculty, where we have a couple of individual case examples of people who have come and worked with us in faculty affairs who have shown that as they have had decreased satisfaction with work, increased levels of burnout, and really had issues with potentially not even staying in the medical field, their patient satisfaction scores also were significantly lower. When departments have worked with them and gotten those individuals into a better position where they feel more healthy, more well, and their overall engagement with their job increases, we see the corollary of the patient satisfaction scores also increase. And it's really made for a couple of our physicians, that's been a really significant personal finding that's helped them to find meaning again in what they're doing as a physician. And we'll talk about that meaning component a little bit later today. This particular slide is a summary of burnout rates across specialties. So I always like to show this to groups just so you can get an idea of where your group falls. You're about 10th from the top there. And this data, sorry, I apologize, it cut off a little bit there at the top, but basically ranks from 2011 to 2014. So kind of over this span of time when we really started getting a lot more interested in the rates of burnout, really looking at trying to measure it a little more consistently, and we can see that universally across specialty, no matter where you practice, the rates of burnout as measured have increased. It's not just physicians, and that's part of our significant concern as well. Our learners are also experiencing really, really high rates of burnout. So when we look at different reviews looking at overall learners, we find that the majority of them, high numbers of them, up to 20 to 30% and sometimes even higher, show signs of depression and overt depression as they go through school. And this is not just medical students, but also biomedical graduate students. We can find studies that compare them against other types of graduate students and multidisciplinary individuals. And we do seem to start to find higher rates of depression, emotional symptoms, and burnout in medical students in particular. And that's become such a significant source of concern that most medical and teaching institutions are starting to develop wellness programs that are not just targeted obviously at faculty, but have to be targeted all the way through our learners. This particular icon that I have here at the bottom is the icon developed by Duke for their student wellness program. And one of the themes that you'll see as we talk today is that wellness is never about just one component. So there are multiple components of our lives that have to be integrated in a fashion that allows us to be well. And that's what they found this particular icon to represent. So when somebody talks about the term burnout, what are we really talking about in terms of not just patient satisfaction, but us as that whole well person? And we look to Tate Shanafelt, who is the Chief Wellness Officer at Stanford now. He was at Mayo when he did a lot of his original research. He's really one of the leading pioneers in looking at physician wellness and how we should be approaching wellness in the academic medicine community. This is a very popular icon that he has circulated that really shows the both personal and professional impact of burnout and the personal and professional impact of basically being unwell in your work environment and not being able to integrate all aspects of your wellness together. So we not only see those decreased patient satisfaction and increased errors, but we also see really high levels of emotional issues. We see increased problems with substance use, and of course we see physician suicide. So how did we get to this point? This is not a problem that developed overnight. This is a problem that has developed over time in a system that is extremely stressful. And what we find as we really break down the different components of what drives burnout in physicians is that it's a really complex matrix. So not only do we have all of these components that are listed on this slide that are all interfering and causing increased issues for physicians, but they're within individual factors. So we could actually take 4 different levels of picture and lay them on top of one another for this slide and talk about each one of these components from an individual factor, from a work unit factor, from an institutional or organizational factor, as well as at a national level. That means this problem is not something we are going to fix today. Sorry, I stole my own thunder. But we are going to talk about the things we can do from an individual perspective and from a work unit perspective on a daily basis that can impact how we are able to move either into the engagement side of our work or beyond the burnout side of our work. And those of us at the administrative level are working at the organizational level to try to find ways to alleviate more of these stressors. And there are national efforts right now looking at how we can address this across the healthcare system. But obviously those changes take quite a bit of time. I really liked the quote that I found from Kearney, who says, "A state of emotional distress that is manifested in decreased work performance resulting from negative attitudes and behaviors." This is his definition of burnout, and to me that really speaks to me. Again, being a psychologist, I think a lot about, and I'm going to frame a lot of this today for you, in terms of cognitive behavioral theory. So when we talk with anyone that comes into our offices, we really focus on the fact that the brain, being as complex as it is, actually correlates our thoughts, our behaviors, and our feelings all simultaneously. That's a significant aspect of what we do when we work with patients to help them understand how their emotions are not happening in isolation. That's a really significant factor when we think about burnout, because ultimately what's happening is that our emotions are driving poor performance. It's also coming, however, from negative attitudes and negative beliefs about where we are at. Those types of issues lead to those top 3 indicators of burnout, which are emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and that reduced feeling of effectiveness or achievement. What's interesting is while we see higher rates of burnout in physicians compared to other professions across the country, we also see really high rates of overall satisfaction with our jobs. We like what we do. That to me also speaks to the fact that this is just a high pressure environment. Again, systemically, We are caregivers. We give of ourselves constantly, and so we will have to find ways to manage that while still addressing these other issues. The drivers come from, as we all know, excessive workloads, difficulty with life integration, and loss of autonomy and control. And so if you look at those three things, they overlap with those three elements of burnout really directly. I'm not going to belabor the point, but we all know that as we continue to operate in an environment of high stress, if we don't moderate that stress in some way for ourselves, then long term what we will do is we will drive biological changes that result in decreased neuro and physiological functioning within ourselves. So our ultimate goal is to find ways to restore that balance while working in these high pressure environments and allowing people to have the time to try to address some of these systemic issues. No matter where you look in the internet and in the literature right now, you will find model after model after model of ways that you can achieve balance. You can buy them, you can subscribe to them. Ultimately, what I want to try to help you understand today is that a lot of this just comes from you. And it's learning what types of habits and behaviors you can engage in to help yourself achieve this balance and better manage these types of do lists that we all ultimately come to. We don't walk in here and try to tell people, well, you should just meditate every day or you should just think happy. We're going to talk a little about those concepts today, but the reality is if somebody came to me and said, hey, your life would be better if you would just meditate every day for 30 minutes, I'd say, I'll put that on the schedule for 2021. How's that sound? So ultimately, our belief is we have to continue to get through what we have in front of us, but there are ways that we can better manage that so that it's not as overwhelming to us. Now don't worry, I'm not going to make you guys do a big group activity today, I promise. But I am going to suggest to you a few things that when I run larger workshops, I have my participants do. And I'd just like you to file them away and think about them. And then perhaps you could take a few moments to do them at another time. I always have people start off by thinking about roles. What roles do you play? Who is it that you really are? And this is not just at work. This is about every aspect of your life. We all have dozens and dozens of roles, labels, titles that fit us. And these are all things that we're required to do something about. When you think about those roles, which of those mean the most to you? When do you feel the most you? When are you the most comfortable with yourself? And you know that you're comfortable with yourself because you're probably having a really big influence on the people around you when you feel that way. And then what are the goals you have around those roles? So if one of your main and primary roles is being a parent, what's your goal in being a parent? Do you want to raise a functional child? Do you want to raise an emotionally healthy child? Have you thought about and put words to what those goals might be? And we're going to talk as we go through this today about how that then impacts and drives where your motivation comes from. When we have a goal that is an ultimate goal, when we have an ultimate concern, something that truly, truly drives us, it will organize us and give us motivation to move forward. So what we're ultimately talking about here is grit. And Angela Duckworth is a psychologist who's really explored this concept. And if you're interested, I encourage you to Google her. She's got some great TED Talks and some really entertaining things on the internet that drive a lot of these points home. But ultimately, what grit is the capacity to have focused passion towards something that drives you through any obstacles that might interfere with your ability to get there. So it's consistency in goal setting over time. Everyone here in this room and listening has grit. In order to achieve the things that we as high achievers have done, we all have grit. We have the ability to persevere through obstacles that get in our way. This is different from self-control, which is the ability not to eat the cupcake that's sitting in front of you right at this moment. Instead, this is the quality and the characteristic that really persists and takes us through long term. What's fascinating, though, about grit, if you really start looking at the literature, is grit is a better predictor of somebody's success than their IQ. So no matter how smart you are, if you do not have the ability to persist through challenges, you will not be as successful. And this has been shown time after time in multiple different groups. So a lot of the research has looked at military personnel and their ability to succeed in the military. It's even looked at individuals who are able to get to the last levels, the higher levels of the National Spelling Bee. It's looked at people even who have been able to graduate from some of our worst and most under or disadvantaged school districts. So what this says to us is that right off the bat, when we're dealing with and living in a system that we know will be challenging and stressful, we can draw on characteristics that bring us strength, and that includes the ability to adapt to any maladaptive beliefs that are taking us off course. Understanding that if we do have failure, if we do something wrong, that's not permanent. That doesn't mean that defines us. Understanding that when we get frustrated and when we do hit an obstacle, it doesn't mean we need to quit. And that ultimately, by seeing things as a challenge and an opportunity to develop, what we're doing is we're growing our mind, we're growing our abilities, and we're increasing that overall ability level for ourselves. This has started to make a wonderful resurgence in early elementary education. So one of the things that we're finding, and you may have even heard when we talk about our learners, is that by the time people get to medical school, it's kind of too late. If they're experiencing difficulties managing stress and managing this type of environment, it's because they already haven't learned those skills. And so we're backing up through the pipeline, and we're trying to figure out how to reach people earlier and drive them into the medical field. But I would also argue we need to be teaching our young children grit at a much earlier age, because grit leads to growth mindset. And so grit means that instead of getting frustrated and stuck on a problem and saying, okay, I give up. And so in an elementary school student, this is, I don't know how to do long division, I give up. Versus, I really don't know how to do this right now, but I know that if I keep at this, or I ask for help, or I work with my team, I'm going to figure out a way to get this done. And we're teaching children that that growth mindset will get them much farther than just giving up and having a fixed mindset. So with grit, the most effective form of practice is actually to push yourself past your skill level. So it's not just staying comfortable, it's not just staying in the area where I know I'm really good at this, but it's pushing yourself to make mistakes. I have children as well, and my kiddos hear this from me all the time because we're hockey players in my house, so that's why I actually moved north. It's a lot more hockey up here. Actually not versus Dallas, but that's okay. So when we get on the ice, what do I say to my kids all the time? I say, well, you're not learning if you don't fall down. You literally cannot learn to play hockey unless you fall down. And so it's kind of, to me, one of the perfect examples of grit. If you're out there and you're skating, but you skate every line perfectly and you never fall, then you're skating safely and you're not actually pushing yourself outside that comfort zone. This is also a key one for me. When someone has grit, they are patient with themselves, so they are not self-critical. We are a very driven group in general. To go through all of the education and all of the training and all of the work that we do, we are generally a very driven group, and that means oftentimes we are very hard on ourselves. But in order to get past that and understand that I don't have to criticize myself each time, I can use these challenges as opportunities, I can make mistakes and see that as a place for growth, means that we can go forward with good intention, we can be open to feedback from other people, and that leads itself to a growth mindset for groups as in general and teams, and allows us to really start reaching those goals that I talked about that are related to our roles. So again, a very quick look online, and you'll find a lot more that you can read about if you look at grit and growth mindset. This quote down in the bottom is directly from Angela Duckworth, and basically says grit is like living life like a marathon and not like a sprint. When we're in a stressful environment, often days we feel like every single day we're just sprinting, and we're sprinting to get through it. And readjusting our mindset to understand the goals that we're ultimately reaching will help us to get past some of that. So let's talk for a moment about Marty Seligman, who's he's called the father of positive psychology. He's a psychologist who developed a model that encompasses happiness and well-being. We call this the PERMA model, and there's 5 different tenets: positive emotions, engagement, relationships, meaning, and achievement. And so yes, we are going to talk about think happy for just a second, but stick with me because there's actually a lot of science behind thinking happy. The human brain is wired to negativity. There are a lot of reasons for this, most likely, but ultimately when we really break it down in research, we find that the human brain requires 3 positive thoughts to overcome just 1 negative one. So for me, this cartoon kind of really encompasses this. I have days when I feel this way, and it can be really difficult to stop that negative thought process. What's fascinating is it even happens in our sleep. So I'm sure many of you sitting in this room have had a morning when you wake up and you're really mad at the person you're sleeping next to, and they didn't do anything. but it had to do with some dream you had or some negative feeling that you bring out with you. And that kind of thing happens without us even realizing, but the brain is wired to do it. There's likely a reason for that, because that negative bias, that ability to pull out negative things in our environment from an evolutionary perspective, probably kept us safe at one time. So if we're able to notice the things that are threats, that are dangers, that are difficult for us, we probably stayed alive a little bit better. But the problem is we don't need that anymore, but our brain still thinks that way. So now instead, what we find is that even though positivity and positive emotions will give us an ability to be more open-minded and more creative, and again lead more towards that growth mindset, the negative bias is always there. The other interesting factor that's come out in this research is that pleasure alone, and for pleasure, what I mean by pleasure is for most of us kind of that unplugging that we do, that we all think is our stress relief these days. So you sit and stream some Netflix, or you sit and just chill out for a few minutes. That actually doesn't add to overall positive emotions. It continues to keep your focus relatively narrow. So remembering that emotions are just not the end product. The emotion is just the avenue that gets us to where we want to be. It changes our behavior and it increases our behaviors. And so through that, it also changes us neurocognitively. If we can really access more positive emotions, then ultimately what we're doing is we are increasing our attention span, we're increasing our creativity, and we're really opening up our abilities as a whole. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is cultivating a feeling of optimism. So it's the ability to look at your past, your present, and your future in a way that is constructive and in a way that leads to growth. Again, that growth mindset, that recognition that those challenges that you've experienced have led you to where you are now. How many of us have said things like, I wouldn't be who I was today if that hadn't happened? That's a growth mindset, that alone. That ability to really put yourself into situations where you can frame and see things as more positive places us in an ability, or gives us that ability to then think more optimistically about all of our situations, no matter even if it is a systemic issue that we're not going to change immediately. How do we do this? How do we cultivate some of these positive emotions in ourselves? Well, we can start with forgiveness. So I have already mentioned once, we all tend to be a little bit hard on ourselves. We're all pretty driven when we're in academic medicine. That's kind of what's gotten us here. But sometimes we need to just forgive ourselves. Sometimes we need to cut ourselves a break. And this may not even be related to anything that has to do with work on a given day, but maybe you're walking around one day feeling like, man, I have not worked out in 2 weeks. I can't believe it. I can't get back on track. And sometimes what we need to do is take that moment and recognize, I've had a lot of challenges the last couple weeks. I have been really busy. I may not have gotten to the gym the last few weeks, but I will get back. This doesn't mean that I'm done completely. So by giving ourselves that slight bit of forgiveness, we shift how our mind is dealing with that particular stressor, and it places us in a place of more positive emotion, which again opens that mind up. Savoring. This is an interesting one, and one that, again, we've actually had faculty come to us here at MCW and talk about the effect of this. So savoring starts to relate to mindfulness. So I told you I was going to mention both thinking happy and mindfulness. So mindfulness is that ability to stay in the moment, to really bring yourself in. Now, most of us are not raised in this culture, at least, to meditate on a regular basis. However, if we are able to increase our overall mindfulness, what we are able to do is better appreciate and be in the moment. And doing that, there's a lot of research that shows that doing that will, again, bring these positive emotions, really change the valence of where you're at emotionally. To do this, basically, all you have to do is take a moment to truly appreciate something. And so we've had a faculty member who has talked about the opportunity to eat an apple. So when you eat an apple, most of us in a busy day, we're just shoving it in. We're trying to get it through. We got to get to the next patient, the next thing. We got to chart whatever it is we've got to do. But this particular faculty member came to us and was talking about how he's tried to incorporate this into his daily life by taking a moment and simply stopping and thinking about the apple. Now that sounds ridiculously simple. But what we do when we take that moment and when we force ourselves to reconnect with that is we're actually, again, changing how we're perceiving the world around us. And we're building a more positive framework for everything that we're doing. And then, even more important, you can share those moments. You can notice somebody's nice top that day, or you can give them a compliment, or you can even just say hello. Really, the other thing that this relates to is gratitude. So if we study gratitude, we find that individuals who practice and experience gratitude show lower signs of emotional distress. They show lower signs of psychiatric illnesses. Even in people with diagnosed PTSD, we see lower symptomology. We see people who report higher levels of overall wellness, overall well-being, and interestingly, better sleep. There's study after study after study of what it means to be grateful. And again, a lot of this relates to the meditation literature and the mindfulness literature. But basically, any and all of these qualities are things that any of us would strive towards. Fewer physical symptoms, greater levels of wellness, higher levels of optimism. But the reality is, how many times a day do you truly, think to yourself for a moment, how many times a day do you truly feel grateful? How many times do you articulate that thought in your mind? Probably most of us don't take the conscious thought to think about being grateful on a daily basis. This is an area that I've actually incorporated into my personal wellness and balance, which I've tried a lot of things, especially in this role and as I've gone through a lot of this, but this one was interesting to me as I really started digging into this literature because I realized I started doing this on my own. And didn't even realize that there was this whole kind of science behind it, which made sense. But for me, it's about taking that moment and finding individual ways that I can be grateful for where I am at. And so what this means for me is I use this as kind of my way of counteracting those negative things. So if I've got to come up with 3 positive things, but I'm driving into work one day and somebody's cut me off and I forgot my coffee, that's a really bad one, and I'm late, and so I feel like kind of everything's going wrong in this particular moment. By the time I park and walk into my office, I'm probably going to be really grumpy. But I have found that if instead, as I'm walking in my office, I can take just a moment, I don't even have to stop, but as I'm walking, I say to myself consciously, I am so glad somebody planted those flowers right there. They're actually really pretty. And it's a nice morning. Simple as that. I am grateful that I had this nice chance to walk in good weather. And that alone, by the time I get up to my office, usually puts me in a mindset where I can at least say hi to my coworkers that morning instead of just walking in my office and closing the door, or at least be in a better state. And so that then influences my entire team environment and influences everyone around me, and then that carries forward throughout the day. Simple moments of gratitude. When we look at this from a research perspective, there is a suggestion towards something called 3 good things. So what this is the idea that at least 2 hours before you go to bed at night, you're going to take a moment to write down 3 good things that have happened that you are grateful for in that day, and what your role in those things might be. Now that might sound more challenging. I didn't plant those flowers. What's my role? Well, my role was I actually got myself to work and I walked along that path that day. I was there. I'm the one who saw them. So you had some role in whatever it is you choose to be grateful for that day, no matter how small it may be. You write those down, and there are ways to help you come up with ideas if you're somebody who struggles with this. And do this for at least 2 weeks, consistently, every night. This has been looked at time and time again, and every time within that first week, people start reporting higher levels of overall positive feelings. What's really interesting is that even if people don't continue it every day, the benefits last for months past the exercise itself. They've actually looked at this in medical personnel. At Duke, they looked in the NICU, and what they found is that after 2 weeks of this exercise, all of the staff reported that they were talking less about how stressed out everybody was and how hard everything was, and talking more about themselves and their personal lives and home and things that really gave them balance and positive feelings. And ultimately, by the end of the study, their rates of burnout decreased and their rates of wellness increased. This has been shown in residents as well, and there's several studies that show that it works with different types of medical personnel. The mechanism ultimately seems to be, again, just reframing towards that positive. Grateful people tend to recognize more things around them. So when you start thinking grateful, you start thinking positively, you notice more of it. It feeds on itself. But it also has an impact on the people around you. When you're grateful for things, you take a moment, especially if you're able to share that in any way, then that influences and has ripple effects far beyond your own emotional well-being. So if you think for a moment about a day, maybe you were having a really bad day and somebody just takes even a second to say, hey, thanks for that email yesterday, that was actually really helpful. Sometimes that's all you need to turn your day around, and you can really impact the people around you. Again, very small things is what they sound like, but ultimately the effect they have over time is what changes and frames how our brain is interpreting what's going on around us. The next area on Seligman's PERMA model is engagement. Engagement basically is something that we study in academic medicine with all of our surveys that we all love to get that come in our inbox. We look at the level of engagement of our faculty, of our learners, but ultimately what engagement means is when you find something where when you're doing it, time flies. You don't even notice. You've just been in a zone. That's when you're engaged. Now, obviously, we're not all going to be fully engaged every single day. That's understandable. But ultimately, that's the feeling we all want. I know for me, when I really have a good day at work is the day that I look up and the time is done and it's time to go home. I'm like, wow, it doesn't even matter what I was working on. It might have even been the project I least wanted to get done. But if I was in that zone and I was open to it and I was really flowing, then that's when I'm the most engaged. And that's ultimately what we really want to get at, because that drives, again, that positive intention. This is an incredibly powerful antidote to burnout. If we think again about that emotional exhaustion, that cynicism, if we're able to really be in a flow, really be engaged with our work, then that is a really powerful antidote to those issues. This means that ultimately we don't need to be working more or working less, like less time. We need to be working more engaged. We need to be giving of ourselves, but in a way that allows us to tap into where our strengths are. So thinking again about those roles, the goals that you set for yourself, what do you want to excel in? What aspects of your job can you pull those in? How can you access those things that you really have an interest in wanting to develop? And how can you pull those into your daily work? And sometimes those are things we've never even thought about bringing to work. I want to be maybe your value or your goal is to be a really honest person. And so how can you really reflect that in your daily work? Some of these kinds of questions, they're not the things we stop and take time to think about on a regular basis. But if we do, then we're able to really increase in our engagement and our flow, our ability to bring ourselves to the table. The next area that Seligman talks about is relationships. I've already mentioned a couple of times we're a very driven group. Along with that, in our culture generally comes a bias of individuality. So we all tend to kind of think we got to do this on our own. Most of us do. So we tend to have this belief that if you're a really strong person, if you're really able to achieve a lot, you can do it all on your own. The reality is that research shows it's exactly the opposite. So we actually are very social beings, and we perform best when we have people around us. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be everybody's best friend, but it does mean that we have to think about the fact that the people around us and the relationships that we have are really a huge, significant driver of how we are feeling in the moment. So how you integrate with your team, how you work with your coworkers, how you are at home, the people that you surround yourself with in life, furry or people, no matter what who it is that's meaningful to you, those relationships, those things that are the most meaningful is part of what's going to drive your overall resilience. And so we have to think about this in the sense that those relationships do take some work. So it's not like we can just exist among each other and have positive benefits from working as a team. We actually really do have to take some time every once in a while to care and tend to those relationships. So how do we do that? What do we have to do? Well, probably one of the first ones, unfortunately these days, is truly to unplug. So it's when you have that 5-minute break, you don't jump on your phone and scroll through social media. You actually set it down. And instead you say hi to the person across from you, or you ask your coworker, I remember you said something about you were building a garage. How's that going? and you take just a few moments to connect with somebody as a person. This again sounds so simple, but it's something we don't do very often right now. We've really started to get kind of off the rails when we think about how we're interacting socially with one another. And I think you'll see as you start watching the literature coming out with children now, there is a lot of neurocognitive data showing that there are huge benefits that we are missing in development by lack of social connectedness. Doing something nice for someone else. So as I mentioned, giving a small favor, giving a small compliment or doing a small favor for somebody. Again, that simple act of gratitude can help them feel more connected. I'll be honest, I was a little bit nervous walking in today. I always get nervous before I talk. I don't know why, I can't help it, I always do. But somebody complimented me on the way I looked this morning when I walked in. I was like, yes! That one little compliment kind of gave me the little boost I needed, right? So that one little thing that you can do for someone else, you have no idea what their day is like again, but it can really help. Taking a task that you might ordinarily do alone and finding a team member and saying, hey, do you want to work on this together? And trying to do that, again, creating an environment where you work together and build that camaraderie. And I don't know if any of you have heard, so a pediatric in focus, so I do a lot of my work in children's, in pediatrics and looking at that literature. But there was a movement, again, in elementary schools and junior highs by Oprah Winfrey, of all people. And she called it Just Say Hello. And basically the idea here was if you're walking through the lunchroom and somebody's sitting at a table by themselves, just say hello. You don't even have to sit down and talk in that moment. You don't have to be their best friend, but just say hello. And the science behind that, again, is that engagement, that social engagement with the people around us, and that changes and can completely change how a person is feeling and relating with their day that day. Meaning or values is another pillar that Seligman talks about, and so this comes back again to that role activity that I talked about in the very beginning, and thinking about what are your roles, what is it you really value, when are you the most authentic, when do you really feel the most connected to the things and the people around you. A true sense of meaning is basically purpose that's derived from belonging to something bigger than yourself. And I would venture to say that anyone who practices in academic medicine in any capacity has this in spades. We all have something that we're serving. We all have a reason for being here and for doing what we do. But it's very easy to lose that in the daily grind of stress and so-and-so didn't do this and I'm frustrated with this, and we tend to forget that meaning. We forget that value and what we're bringing to the table. And the fact that, again, we at OFA strongly believe we have absolutely the best faculty anywhere in the country. And so if you're working in the best place there is to work, you're bringing incredible purpose. You're bringing incredible meaning to everything you're doing. Find your own way of being able to articulate that in your mind. Remind yourself daily of why you're doing this work. What is it that brings you to the table? And that might change from time to time. It may be a slightly different meaning given what you're tackling or what your challenges are for that day. But remember that purpose and bring that in. Sharing that with other people brings that positivity to the entire team. We have a couple of efforts on campus, and some of you may have already seen these. One is called #WhyIDoIt. But a few of these efforts take place in different areas where people are encouraged to take a moment and share with one another why they do this job, what is the value, what is their meaning. So one of these is a post-it wall. If you have any chance to go down to the ER, they usually have this up in the kind of late winter, and they create an entire wall where everyone, no matter what your role is in the department, is encouraged to write down on a given day on that post-it why you're there that day. What is the meaning behind doing this for you? What is it? And when you read them, it truly is a good illustration of how it can be anything on a given day. Some days it's a far grander meaning, and other days it's a very simple meaning. But it doesn't matter. It all brings us together, and it increases that level of altruism, that kindness, and that gratitude, which are really, again, those feelings that we need in order to counteract the stress of the environment itself. And then the fifth area in the PERMA model is achievement. And ultimately, achievement is accomplishment. It is that sense of accomplishment and knowing that you have gained something. So going back to those roles, going back to thinking about who you want to be when you grow up and what your goals are, you want to think about, are they goals that really are serving your own development, or are these goals that you have to achieve in order to achieve someone else's needs? And those are different. Sometimes we have to do things because other people require them of us. But that's not what really is going to tap into your own values, your own meaning, and your own engagement in your work. So make sure that as you set those goals and you think about your goals, that you're really coming up with intrinsic goals that are meaningful for you. Another thing you can think about as you goal set is that goals should really focus on an activity as opposed to something very material. So a really good example here for learners is when you're studying for a test. Why do I want to study for this test? Well, I want to get a high pass. We all do that. Again, we're all kind of that goal-oriented, but what happens when we set a goal like that is it becomes very difficult for it to be tangible in our mind, and it becomes very easy for us to fall into a lot of the negativity biases, and we're gonna kind of go through what some of those are, those automatic thoughts that pop into our head that keep us from really focusing on our positive and our growth abilities. So instead, if you're able to break your goal down and talk about it in terms of specifics, like, okay, if I study for 45 minutes and then take a 15-minute break and I do that 3 times, then I will be ready for this exam tomorrow. And then what happens when you do that is you're choosing an ability to promote your ability, a goal that allows you to promote your abilities, and not something where you're just thinking about the final end. So in doing that, we're actually thinking about how we can increase our own ability, how we can grow, how we can strive, how we can reach. And if something doesn't work, we can adjust that goal. We can change it. Okay, well, next time I have to study for 45 minutes 5 times over, and that will get me where I want to be. But we have an ability to recognize how we can change it, how we can control it. So remembering again that that third driver of burnout is that loss of autonomy. It's loss of control. There are a lot of things in healthcare right now we don't have a say in. We can try to change that systemically over time, but for the moment, we've got to figure out a way to deal with that lack of control. So as we're thinking about how we're engaging with our work, if we can adjust our goals and set things in a way that allows us to recognize the control that we do have, then that places us in a much better and much more positive valence than just being frustrated with not reaching that end goal. Promotion goals are also about the opportunity to improve yourself and make yourself better. So we had the other goal about losing 10 pounds versus eating however you would describe healthier. That's another good example of setting goals that allow you to promote yourself and make positive overall changes rather than something that's more concrete. When we think about not meeting a goal, we have to remember from a growth mindset perspective that we need to recognize challenges as opportunities for growth. So one of the things that happens when we run into problems with meeting a goal is we tend to catastrophize. We tend to have some all or none thinking. So all of a sudden, this is the worst thing that could have happened. It's definitely going to impact me for the rest of my life. This has changed the course of how I think about myself. And maybe those thoughts aren't actually conscious. Maybe those aren't things that we're actually sitting there saying to ourselves. Because if we did say them to ourselves, we would probably think we kind of sounded a little bit silly. But our brain goes there anyway. Our brain automatically thinks these ways. And unless we recognize that and work to actively shift that thinking, then we allow that negativity bias to carry us forward. So we have to remember that through goal setting and through reframing how we're approaching these goals, we can make that choice to change that interconnection between our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. So now that goal, the goal that we want to get to, that setback that we run into, is not something that completely alters our ability to get there. It's a chance for me to think about a different way that I can make this work. Or it's an opportunity for something else to happen. Now, I know I probably drive a lot of my coworkers crazy because I do this, again, as a trained CBT psychologist. So something will happen in our department and everybody's really mad, and I'll sit there in the meeting and I'll go, well, you know, this is really a chance for us to think about blah, 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 and they all go, oh my gosh. So it can feel awkward at first. But if you practice this and you do this, what happens and what's fascinating is the number of times I will have people come to me after those meetings privately and say, I am so glad you were sitting in that room. You completely changed the way that everybody dealt with that. Because what happens is it changes the entire team environment. And so now instead of everybody sitting there griping and complaining or just feeling that frustration that we all have in this industry, instead it changes. And the whole mood in the room, it's not that it's any less frustrating, but it becomes a team effort. How can we figure out then what we do with this now? And ultimately, everybody walks out and they feel like they're in a better place. Nothing's changed immediately, but the way that we individually now can cope with that stress has changed. And that's where people end up coming back and saying things like, I'm really glad you said that. So these simple changes, these simple efforts can really make a significant difference. Ultimately, what we're talking about here is building resiliency. What kinds of things can we do to overcome these constant daily stressors that will be there and are going to be a reality in our life? And each one of these types of negative thought processes happen automatically. We can't change that, but we can learn to recognize it, and we can learn to counteract them, particularly if we all work together as a team. When we look at the Seligman's work overall and we really look at character strengths, so this is taking it outside of the burnout literature for a while and just looking from the positive psychology literature, we find that there are 3 individual character strengths that are often associated with the happiest people. And those are hope, gratitude, and love. And so interestingly, I think that those also correlate somewhat with what we're talking about when we do talk about burnout. So how do we maintain hope instead of cynicism? How do we maintain gratitude instead of losing our way and losing our value and our meaning? And how do we cultivate those relationships around us? So bringing it back to those values one last time, think about what you can match within your own position. What can you do within your own job to really bring your values forward? How can you start making just very small changes on a daily basis that allow you to bring in gratitude, that allow you to maybe strengthen the relationships around you? And how can you start cultivating these things in a more active way? A few examples and suggestions that I can offer you that other teams have used are things like the pause. So there are teams, and some of you may have even done this already, there are teams here at our institution that are already doing this. This is a very formal version of the pause, and if you want to look it up, you can pull out the exact terminology. It's listed there at the bottom. But it was originally designed to be used after the death of a patient. And it was really to bring the entire team together in that moment and offer closure and a way of reframing and thinking about this person that was just lost as a person and a life and appreciating that for that moment. But we've had teams that have taken this, and I have some colleagues at other places across the country that are also using this in different ways, and they've reframed this, they've rewritten it, and they've used it in multiple different contexts. And so you can use this as an opportunity to think about within your own teams, are there moments in your daily work that would be helpful to take a pause as a team? And if so, what would you say? And what would you say to one another that would be helpful? Another interesting concept that people are using is something called the going home checklist. This is when, at the end of your workday, you take a moment to think about the day, and you can take at least one thing that was really challenging and acknowledge that. Really own that for yourself. But then also practice that forgiveness and let it go. Recognize that it was challenging, recognize your opportunity within that challenge, and then let that go for the day. And then purposefully think of 3 things that went really well that day, things that you were really happy with, proud of, grateful for, whatever that might be. Then, before you walk out the door, you check on at least one colleague. You just check in. Make sure they're doing okay, ready to be done for the day, how you doing right now. And then when you walk out the door, you leave it. And so it's an ability to just switch your attention so that you can then focus on the whatever the role is that you're stepping into at that point. Home, volunteerism, whatever else it is you do outside of the office. So this is another technique that people try. If you look on Duke's website, there's actually quite a number of pages, I want to say 2 to 3 of them, of that list, idea after idea after idea, of things that they are encouraging their faculty and learners to use. So the thing they start off with, first and foremost, comes back to what we've been talking about, and that is, why do you do this? What do you bring? What is it that your strength is? What do you bring to this environment? And then they offer all the same types of ideas that we've been going through today. So talking about writing down adjectives that you want people to use about you. What values do you want people to see that you value? Keeping journals, trying the pause, writing down the 3 good things, and the ideas go on considerably. So if you want more information, you can look there. You can also look on our Infoscope page. We have a lot of resources available here at MCW. You are never alone. We are always here. We have both faculty affairs and student affairs and graduate affairs. We have multiple offices that are engaged in our wellness and well-being efforts right now, and all of us are able to bring you any resources you might need. And I will end with just that idea that you should never be so busy trying to make a living that you forget to live a life well lived. Yes?